Please don't forget about your countdown, because we are over time.
Okay, so it's counting down now, yeah?
Yep.
Oh, hello, my name is David Hooks. I'm from the University of Liverpool. Liverpool is my hometown, and I've retired and been given a position in the university. I'm described as appears that I'm a computer scientist, but I'm not. My background is physics, then molecular biology, and digital electronic engineering, so I'm not actually technically a computer scientist. Now, what I'd like everybody to do is write down the URL at the bottom, because I'm not going to have time to cover the whole of my speech, which I would like to you to read at your leisure. So if you have you got a clicker, a mobile clicker? Hello? Where's the clicker? Okay. While you're writing it, I'll just give you a brief background. I come from a very poor family in near the Dock Road of Liverpool, but I had good fortune or luck to be educated at Trinity College, Cambridge, and under people like Professor Dirac. So I had a bit of luck in life. Liverpool, if you don't know anything about it, well, you may have heard that it's to do with pop music and the Beatles and stuff like that. Actually, my actual claim to fame is that when I was a schoolboy, I was quite a naughty boy, and I used to specialize in telling jokes about the teachers, to the teachers, so I spent a lot of time in the special detention class, a permanent resident of the detention class, and one of the reasons I liked going to it was John Lennon of the Beatles, because he was he was always making jokes and a bit of an anarchist, and I suppose had similar tendencies. So that was my background. But Liverpool is connected closely to Manchester, and it's actually played a very important role in the history of capitalism. Liverpool and Manchester formed an axis, and the whole mercantile and then industrial phase of capitalism took place. Manchester, for instance, is the first industrial city in the world, and Liverpool used to supply the goods to the factories of Manchester. The first phase, it actually was involved in the slave trade. It was the dominant port for the slave trade, so we have a black or dark history associated with our town as well. So that's a little bit of background. Okay. Is there a clicker that I can use while walking around?
I'm afraid not.
Oh,
you use
right.
double click
Well,
by
somebody
the left.
had a clicker today. What happened to that?
Some of your colleagues
had their own clicker.
have got it, unfortunately.
Well, whoever's got the clicker, hand it back. Right. This is the outline of my talk. The first thing I'm going to talk about is a contradiction. I'll tell you what that is in a minute. I'm going to talk about multiple crises, the triple crunch. Then I'm going to ask the question, why are we so dumb? A lot of people here have emphasized how clever we are. I'm going to emphasize how dumb we are. I'm going to talk about two paradigms, what I call the Cartesian-Newtonian paradigm versus the quantum paradigm. I'll explain what that means. It doesn't mean that I'm going to solve Schrödinger's equation to deduce the states of a socio-political economic system of the world. I'm afraid I have to disappoint you there, but it's an analogy or a thought, a way of thinking about problems. I'm going to talk about what is meant by species being, which is probably, some of you will know, comes from Marx. I'm going to talk about multiple alienations of our species being under present-day capitalism. I'm going to talk about how digital technologies arose. I may have to scoot through that quickly. I'm going to talk about the Cartesian-Newtonian paradigm in more detail, then the quantum paradigm, and then I'm going to talk about how quantum paradigm is related to Marxian political economy, which I should say, this talk is part of this talk I gave already at the Sakharov Center some years ago at a conference organized by my friends and comrades of the Praxis group, one of whom is here today, Alexei. So with his permission, I will also include it in this talk, because I gave it at his conference, and so on. Right. And I'm going to talk about what I call quantum paradigm and PSI nets. PSI stands for problem-solving intelligent nets, or SciNets. It so happens that PSI also is the same word, Greek letter psi, which is convenient. Then I'm going to talk about quantum paradigm and global enlightenment, and then I'm going to talk about examples, give some examples of digital instrumentation for global learning, some of my own inventions, the physics is fun machine, and the playful learning matrix, which are small contributions to that. And then finally, I'm going to conclude that another world is possible. How much I get through this, I don't know. We'll see. I'll try to speed up. Now, this is about a contradiction. On the one hand, we are clever enough to create powerful digital technologies that could profoundly change our relationship to each other and to nature, and thus the realization of our true species being. On the other hand, we use these technology blindly in support of a socio-economic system that may well destroy the future of our own and other species. So we're clever enough to create it, but we're not very clever in how we apply it. There are multiple interlinked crises in society, politics, and economics today. Rapid depletion of resources, such as water and energy, wars started to gain control of these resources, loss of biodiversity, climate instability due to global warming, with possible runaway warming if the tipping point is reached due to positive feedbacks. Global economic system instabilities due in part to the use of digital systems to create false, fictitious values that undermine the productive economy. That is the financialization of the global economy. Today, the derivatives market is worth 700 trillion of false value. And that's undermining the stability of the whole productive system on the planet. It's as if Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, who deregulated the control of the banks and so on, they were secret agents of some kind of Marxist international, and they'd read in Marx that if you deregulate banks, they will create fictitious value, and sure enough, they've created a whole ocean of it without much trouble. The use of digital media to spread ignorance and stupidity rather than its potential for enlightenment. So we're in a triple crunch situation, a credit crunch. We don't know, the banks can't lend anyone any money. There's environmental crunch, particularly to do with the environment, and also the climate, and there's resource crunch. We're running out of some basic resources. So we're in that situation now. So we're clever enough to create immensely powerful digital technologies. How is it that we appear to be using them to enhance the possibility of our own destruction as a species? It's even possible to create digital computer models that make realistic predictions about the coming catastrophes. Why are we so dumb? That's my question. Because we are using an out-of-date paradigm to think about and organize life on the planet. This is the Cartesian Newtonian paradigm I'll talk about. We should switch to the quantum paradigm. I'll explain what that means in more detail. The latter can be implemented using digital technologies, including molecular genetic digital technology. Hence, we need to enter what I call the quantum digital age. Or maybe we should be entering it now, but chucking overboard the old paradigm. But we must make the important decisions and carry out collective actions well before 2045. Otherwise, the climate economic instabilities will produce a catastrophe for the planet. We will negate our species being. What is species being? Well, it first used by Feuerbach, but was criticized by Marx in his famous economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844, when he was a young philosopher, before he became an economist. In England, we say it's very dangerous to be an economist, and one famous Irish playwright who had read every word Marx had written, and many other economists, said, well, he said, the danger, what do I think about economists? Well, if you laid them end to end, all the economists in the world, they wouldn't be able to reach a conclusion. So, and so he criticized Feuerbach for being purely reflective mode, not considering the active transformatory meaning. So this is a quote from Marx. Actually going to skip that one, because it's not as good as the next one. Man makes his life activity into an object of his will and consciousness. He has a conscious life activity. He is not immediately identical to any of his determinations. Conscious life activity directly differentiates man from animal life activity. It is this alone that makes man a species being. He's only a conscious being. That is, his own life is an object for his consideration, precisely because he is a species being. This is the only reason for his activity being free activity. Estranged or alienated labor reverses this relationship so that it's just because man is a conscious being that he makes his life activity his essential being, a mere means to his existence. So he negates his own species being and alienates himself from other people. Now, estranged labor just turns thus man's species being, both nature and his spiritual species property, into a being alien to him, into a means for his individual existence. It estranges man from his own body, as well as the external nature and his spiritual aspect, his human aspect. Okay, I'm going to skip the next two. The last quote is most relevant. But under capitalist mode of production, this is from a wonderful paper by Jacob Held about Marx's theory of alienation and species being. Under the capitalist mode of production, or for that matter, a bureaucratic collectivist mode, for instance, the mode you had in the Soviet Union, humans are estranged, alienated from their fellow humans, from the labor process, from the products of their own labor, from nature, and thus from their own species being. Right. Well, that's actually me. Yeah. Okay, this is the, no, not the right one. 1 moment, just move on a bit. I'm having to dash through. The critical theory of Erich Fromm and his distinction between being and having modes of existence is the most notable contemporary adoption of this concept. Alienation is the pathological state of people under capitalist mode of production. Thus Marx's vehement opposition to capital is predicated on his conception of human essence as a kern for human well-being. That's, of course, Marx's view, not the people who took over your country and caused you such enormous disasters. In my view, they were not Marxists. They said they were, but so did the Christians who tortured and burned people at the stake. They said they were doing it in the name of Jesus Christ. And the people who took over your country said they were speaking in the name of Marx. In my view, they were not at all. I'll explain a bit about that later. Of course, he did consider, and it wasn't known to him at the time, there are other determinants of species being, namely the influence of the discoveries of Freud on the influence of sexuality, consciousness, unconscious life, and the origins of neuroses in the parent-child relationship, shows that not only labor, that was directly determines human species being. I'm going to have to, and that's probably the explanation why the last 130 years, his predictions for a unification of working people to choke out capitalism hasn't actually worked, but we've had terrible wars based on nationalism and its stablemate racism, the immense human disasters caused by fascism and Stalinism. Of course, your country suffered terribly from both. Erich Fromm and people like that, and the Frankfurt School, tried to reconcile, in my ways, quite successfully to some extent, by Marx's ideas with Freud's ideas, but I'll have to shoot on. In today's humanity's alienation in all aspects, especially from its species being, is far more advanced than Marx's time. Alienation from nature, a loss of biodiversity, pollution, climate, instability, alienation from each other, tolerance of conditions of extreme poverty, malnutrition, disease for half the global population, wars of control of resources, millions killed, alienation from production. There are unbelievable levels of exploitation in the new economic zones of Asia. The people who make your iPad are suffering considerably and have no proper rights. narco-capitalism stabilized the financial system. London, which is the centre of the world financial system, it's alleged that they received 350 billion from Russian mafia interests, which helped to stabilize it during the recent financial crisis. Alienation of mass culture, dominated by the worship of celebrity film stars, footballers and the like, and that is the living of life vicariously by fantasizing about the lives of the rich and famous. Digital simulation replaces real experience. Alienation from politics, mass media used to manufacture consent. I quote the expression of Chomsky's and Herman's book for the political status quo. Alienation from reason, growth of fundamentalist religion. 40% of US citizens believe the theory of evolution is the devil's work and the Earth is only 6,000 years old. Alienation from products, mass consumerism is infantilist, must-have mentality. Despite the category of human alienation, modern capitalism has also created very powerful digital technologies. I call them, in Marxist sense, powerful forces of production. They are transforming human communications, control of the productive processes on a planetary scale. Oh my God. Oh shit. Right, I'll have to shoot along. Sorry. History of information systems, there's the Big Bang. You were here, all the quarks and electrons that make you up were somewhere there. There's Dirac's famous relativistic field equation, which is giving the particles spin and creating antiparticles, and there's Schrödinger's equation waiting for everything to cool down so you can create atoms and molecules, but move on. So from there we went to molecular genetic information systems, then the human brain, then speech, writing, money information system, printing, electromagnetic information systems, and finally the internet, and that's where you are now. Right, we've a complete circle. The brain is, I'll have to jump this, because obviously I want to get Newtonian paradigm, which is based on the Descartes' idea about a complete divorce between mind or consciousness and matter, and I'm going to have to shoot through and represent that. There's some good quotes from a book by Zohar and Marshall called The Quantum Society. That's in my paper. You'll have to read that at your leisure. And I want to get to my little picture because I'm running out of time. Now that's my picture. It's a very simple picture to indicate the Cartesian Newtonian paradigm. The nodes, which could be people or whatever, are localized, the hierarchical system, bureaucratic, alienating, undemocratic. To the top, that's the General Secretary. Next layer is the Political Bureau. Next layer is the Central Committee, and so on. So that's, or the CEO, the board, and all the rest of it for a corporate entity. Okay? There's been a revolt against Cartesian Newtonianism, and I'm going to have to shoot through that because I've run out of time. That's all in my paper. Now, the alternative paradigm is a quantum paradigm, which a number of people have pointed out is a better way of representing society and culture. I'm not alone in that, but I think I'm maybe not alone, or at least maybe one or two others, pointing out that you can implement the paradigm using digital networks. Key elements of quantum theory: wave-particle duality, dualities of momentum position any time, superposition of states, probability is fundamental, virtual transitions, state of flux, virtual transitions and state, oh, I've got that twice. The role of the observing apparatus in the measurement of quantum processes. I've got to just have to leave this for you. Now, the most important thing is the local unknown local effects. That is key and core to quantum theory. Einstein refused to accept quantum theory, even though he created it, because he couldn't accept there were non-local effects. He called them spukhafte Fernwirkungen, spooky actions at a distance. He wouldn't accept it, but experiments show that in fact that's a fundamental part of quantum physics, and that has been, so this is why I'm having to speed along again, because I want to get to my punchline. There's a bit about, okay, you can explain some of Marx's ideas using this concept of duality. I borrowed the some interesting ideas from Vladimir Afanasyev in his Karl Marx's Great Discovery book, which I found very helpful. Marx could... Can I just have a few minutes? It's well known that Marx was able to discover the twofold character, etc. I'm carrying on that. Hegel's thought... I'm borrowing a graph from a Polish mathematician which represented Hegel's logic as a cyclic graph. Mathematicians will recognize that as a topological folding of a cyclic group into subgroups and so on, so on, so on, so on. Now, that's the quantum paradigm, completely different from the Newtonian paradigm, and that paradigm and the discussion of what it means and so on, each node is connected to every other node. So it's a continuous single Hamilton path through every node. So every node knows what everybody else is doing. They are no longer isolated and alienated. It's a completely different system. And so there are examples of capitalism is always a world system. I give examples of British imperialism, how they connected the slaves in Africa with the labor of Shropshire ironworkers, exchange of Bengali peasants growing opium to products of labor of Chinese peasants growing tea. So that was printing is very important. Okay. So two types of comparison. That's Marx's picture of political economy. That's a capitalist picture. Okay. Now it's possible to put together systems of production based on what I call cooperative, wiki, open tech, problem-solving intelligent nets, PSI nets or SciNets, can be organized using the quantum paradigm, and similarly compare that to hierarchical corporate problem solving using the Newtonian paradigm. Okay. So I'm afraid the discussion you'll have to read in my paper. Now it's finally a possibility of a global enlightenment. That is that everybody can have the global light through digital ICT and instrumentation, and that can connect everybody together, everybody can learn, and that's possible now, in contrast to the 18th century Enlightenment, which was of the few, and that was implemented through that strategy there. And as a consequence of printing, this is a consequence of digital technology. So it's possible that. Two examples of digital instrumentation created by the author's possible contribution to global enlightenment. My physics is fun machine or workstation. There it is there. It can be linked to the internet, and that's how it works. It measures the position and velocity of vehicles and shows it shows, finally my playful learning matrix. That's for children to learn by interacting with computers using RFID tags and so on. Finally, conclusions. Another world is possible. Can quantum SciNets be a reality, or are they fantasy? Not at all. First is the obvious example, Wikipedia, but there's an even clearer example, informal web of cooperation in which a worldwide internet-based circles of collaboration of software experts gave their time freely to develop a product that is more complex than a Boeing 747. The product is far superior to that produced by rival private corporations. I refer to the Linux operating system, which was produced under those principles. Thus, there are great possibilities for creating a world free of exploitation and the development of sustainable production systems based on mutuality and cooperation. We have to abandon the tree-like hierarchies of alienated human relationships characteristic of the Cartesian Newtonian paradigm, instead adopt the quantum paradigm implemented with revolutionary digital technologies. This is a route to the realization of our true species being, and thus the real history of humanity can begin as we enter the quantum digital age. Thank you very much.
Oh. David, fantastic. What a pity that you couldn't have such a speech at the Communist Party of the Soviet Union.